this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. Welcome to this week's episode. In this episode, I spoke with Victorian storyteller M. Chandler. Em and I had a fascinating conversation, and Em's insights into story and storytelling, particularly fairy tales and queer tellings, was really insightful, and I learned a lot from Em and their experience working in this area. I hope you enjoy the interview because I loved it and I could have kept on chatting for quite a long time. I hope you enjoy the interview. Here's Em. Welcome to this week's episode. Today I'm speaking with M. Chandler, who is on the east coast of Australia. Tell me, Em, about where you are and how you got your start in storytelling.
Well, where I am right now is in Naarm or Melbourne, but I'm normally based in Ballarat, which is about an hour and a half's drive from Melbourne, or an hour and a half train trip, which is what I normally do on the lands of the Wathaurong people. And how I got my start in storytelling, well, it's sort of similar to you in the sense that I really started storytelling from 2020. But with the benefit of hindsight, I actually know that happened far below it because I've always been fascinated with fairy tales and folk tales. Especially once I sort of became a young adult, but have always been fascinated. And I'm fascinated enough that I started as a magician rather than a storyteller or an actor or a singer or anything else. I mean, I do all those things, but my very first thing I sort of started actively learning was as a magician. And I got to 2014, into 2014. I've been doing magic for a good while by that point, and I thought it's time for me to do a show at the Melbourne Magic Festival. I'm going to make a whole show, I'm going to produce a show. But I've always worked on themes and topics. I don't want just a random selection of routines. I want something cohesive. What am I going to do? And my family and I were touring through South Australia on a holiday, and I was reading a book, which was a junior fiction novel about fairy tales, and I was laughing. There's lots of in-jokes. Well, I thought there were in-jokes. They're pretty obvious now as someone who's got far deeper into fairy tales. But I thought there were lots of in-jokes about ways fairy tales are interpreted and understood and all things like that. And Mum said, well, you're enjoying this enough. Why don't you do a show on fairy tales and nursery rhymes? You enjoyed it enough to do it. So that's what I did. And so I did this show called Once Upon a Rhyme as the character of the storyteller. Very original name, I know. And it was fundamentally a magic show, but I was really striving to be a storyteller. I was always wanting there to be narrative. I was always trying to look at what the story I was trying to impart. And as that show developed and had new names and had reconfigurations over the next 4 years, I was always striving there to be even more story. I was basically trying to get rid of the magic, any magic that was there. I really wanted to justify it as part of the individual narrative of the telling, which, hit and miss. It wasn't always successful, but I was really wanting to be a storyteller. And as I had developed that show initially, and as I continued, I had fallen totally in love and still totally in love with Jim Henson's The Storyteller, a great TV series from the 80s, particularly the 9 episodes with John Hurt as the storyteller with folk tales, as compared to the semi-sequel series of Michael Gambon with Greek myths. Still beautiful, but I was obsessed with the folklore fairy tale original series. And I still was totally in love. Every time I was reading folk tales of fairies, I was like, oh, that would make a great episode of this storyteller. And I start thinking about it. But I was convinced there was some secret spark that storytellers had that I didn't have. That meant that I couldn't be a storyteller. I was desperate to do it. I wanted to do it. I knew all these stories I wanted, but there's some secret spark. And I couldn't work out what that spark was. And then in 2020, I was doing my honours thesis. I was writing... I'd done my undergraduate degree in music theatre. I was doing an honours thesis, writing a script about a 19th century German queer activist, Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, fascinating man. I was, totally in love with the subject, so I did my honours thesis on it. But the combination of having complete, utter focus on that and 2020 Melbourne lockdowns meant I lived with my parents again for the first time in 3 years, and my parents, my brother, for 9 months, and I love them all dearly, but that was very intense and very sudden. And so the combination of honours thesis and this meant I desperately needed something to do. And with lockdowns, I couldn't go out. There's only so many walks you can take. I can't start any hobbies elsewhere outside the house. I'll finally join a storytelling group. And I knew there was a storytelling group in Melbourne that I'd always been like, can I go? I don't know if I'm allowed to go. What happened? But they're online. I'm desperate to do something else, and I just decide, all right, this month I'm going to do it. And so August 2020, I joined the Newport Storytellers. Told a poem because I wasn't quite game enough to tell a story yet. And it went fantastically enough that the next month that I went ahead and told the story of Odd, an Icelandic fairy tale, which is probably still my favorite fairy tale in the entire world. And basically since then I have been a storyteller. And it kind of feels weird to be like that's it. I became a professional storyteller just like that. But it is kind of what happened. I had already been doing gigs as a magician. I was already an emerging but independent theatre maker, and that has continued so, and it just became the natural progression because I've been so in love with storytelling and continue to be in love with storytelling. And my family, although not telling traditional stories, has always been a family of storytellers. It's just been a natural progression for me to just commit and make it my job.
Oh, that's amazing. And so you're putting on a show at the moment, or you're directing, or you wrote a show? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so one of the ways that before I became a storyteller, for lack of a better phrase, is I was writing stories. So I wrote lots of fairy tales. I retold lots of fairy tales. As you know, my first love of traditional stories, finding obscure or little known variations. And then I saw a piece of children's theatre at the end of 2019 during my undergraduate degree, and it was fine. I mean, I'm sure it was. It's certainly on the higher echelons of children's theatre because there's a glut of very average children's theatre. But I was at this point away going, it was fine. There were things I wasn't quite sure about. I'm like, I'm sure I can do something. I can write something just as good as that. And so I basically sat down, and the following week wrote a script, and I took, it's going to be fairy tales. That's something I've been thinking about for a while. I'll start with the story of Odd, and what else? There's be a theme. Can't be just three random. Well, I guess there'll be queer fairy tales, all right. And so I just sat down and wrote the first draft of the script. I worked with the dramaturg. I had a coffee with the dramaturg that I knew, and we talked about it. And then I continued to write it and develop it and find the three stories and flesh them out until end of 2021, in which La Mama, the fantastic independent theatre in Melbourne, was looking for expressions of interest for their kids programming. And so I went, well, this is the opportunity I've got. So I'd found a cast of newly graduated people from my course at Fair Uni who were like, I know them all, I know they're interested to work with, but I need a director. I have no funding. So I spoke with a friend and colleague of mine and said, what shall I do? And they said, well, it's 5 people. You've written it, you can direct that. So I directed it, and so suddenly I became the writer-director of the Story Keepers, and that is slowly emerging into a children's theatre ensemble, because the dream of the Story Keepers is that it's not just the 3 stories that I've written. So we've got 3 queer fairy tales that we've done at La Mama twice, and we're now about to do again for Midsummer Festival in Melbourne at the start of February 2024. But the dream is to not be those 3 static stories, but actually be a whole canon, like a repertory theatre company of little known fairy tales that we can interpret and perform for kids and those young at heart, with a particularly queer and neurodiverse lens, but just to broaden what we understand as fairy tales, rather than this sort of this canon of 10 stories that we always go back to, lots of which are really, really good, but we just sort of get caught on, well, Rapunzel's great. Like, Rapunzel can be great, but if we don't like Rapunzel, we can also choose to tell 1,001 other stories. So
Yeah,
it's one of my many avenues to try and very slowly change public opinion about fairy tales.
for sure. Well, I mean, I met you at the Fairy Tale Conference a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
you were presenting. You did a survey, if I remember correctly, on the most popular fairy tales, and of course, Cinderella came out on top. I found that a really fascinating, and I too, like you, the popular ones are great, but if you dig deeper, there's some beautiful stories underneath those that get forgotten.
There are, and there's also this wide kind of like, we obviously know there are more than those 10,
Mm.
but we sort of get caught up, or, I mean, don't I say this as someone who had, I have done my own retelling of Cinderella. Don't know, I love Cinderella, I love Red Riding Hood, I love these traditional stories for a reason. They're mostly really fantastic. But the one I go back to is Sleeping Beauty. Now, I think Sleeping Beauty has trends out of history, and the version we know now still can be a great story. But the one that we know the best, personally, bit dull. There's a lot of fantastic imagery, not a lot happens. No one is an active protagonist. It's just a lot of things that happen together. And that's fine if we're happy with that. But if we have issue with it, and there is, I mean, I think there's, it's messy and complicated as all good stories are, but if we don't like Sleeping Beauty, we can choose not to tell it. It's not retold over and over again because of its quality necessarily. It's told over and over again because we're familiar with it, and because fundamentally, and this is true historically, the stories are told mostly by those in positions of power.
Tell me more about
And
that.
so, and so, queer fairy tales is a really good example that people think, well, there aren't queer fairy tales. Well, of course there are queer fairy tales. If there have been queer people, there have been queer fairy tales. Fairy tales are fundamentally a subsection of folk tales, and folk tales are the tales of the folk. So if folk have experienced stories, they're going to try and interpret and express their lives through storytelling. It's what people around the world have done for millennia upon millennia. The ones that are recorded, or the ones that are retold the most, are the ones that people think have value. And so if your values don't align, or if I'm in a position of power and I really don't like that group, I'm not going to tell stories about that group. I mean, infamously, the Arm Thompson author index, which is a fantastic resource for storytellers and fairy tale and folklore lovers. Thompson put, I can't remember the exact number, but in his, alongside the index, there is the folk motif index, which Thompson put together. And in that, he, I think it's like blasphemous behaviors or something, is where he puts homosexual love and lesbian love, and along with bestiality and things. Now, that is a fantastic resource. It's really good to be able to look, distill down folk tales and go, here are the individual bones that we can then piece together and fill in with sinew and muscle and make it come alive. But that is because that's what he thought was appropriate. Now, I'm, as a queer person, can't say I agree with that, but trying to be at a distance, that isn't necessarily wrong or right, but it is an opinion that he has expressed through his work. And that's true of every storyteller, every person who's been involved in this. And so the people fundamentally in power who make the indexes, publish the books, or are trying to promote stories through any medium, oral, visual, film, TV, narratives, books, anything, they are the ones that are going to be dictating which stories we know more. And so we're not going to hear the ones that are just as interesting and as just a good quality and as just as well formed, because they've got something about them that the people in power haven't liked or have thought is worth dismissing.
Oh, for sure. And I think perhaps even that period where literary fairy tales came about, they could be very selective in what they were keeping and what they were then, particularly the Grimms with the Christianization of a lot of the fairy tales as well, the folk tales, as well.
Yeah, and even go back to Charles Perrault. We think of his classic stories, and obviously we definitely get Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella for him, or at least the most well-known versions from him. But we sort of also tend to put Red Riding Hood in him, and he uses Red Riding Hood, but it's not his Red Riding Hood we know, because his Red Riding Hood gets eaten, and that's it. There is no this heroic escape from the wolf. Grandma doesn't come in. There's no woodcutter. It's just she got eaten. Oh, well, here's the moral I'm going to give you. And he puts rhyming verse morals at the ends of all his stories, because that's what he was trying to impart to his audience, that there is something to learn from these stories. And I think there is always something to learn from the stories. I don't think that means every fairy tale has a moral that we can distill like Charles Perrault has done. But, this has always occurred. Even go back to Gambista Basile with The Tale of Tales, the first collection of just fairy tales that we ever have. He's still trying to impart something about Neapolitan culture. It's still written in a very Baroque language, because that's something that he loves and he's trying to impart. And undoubtedly, there's going to be other things about the world that he sees in black and white that are going to put shades on the stories about how they get written and how they get interpreted through the ages, back into the folk tradition, back into the tradition, back into the folk tradition, and so on and so on and so on. None of us are truly impartial. And I think that's important to recognize, but it's also exciting, because it means your opinion of a story, how you tell a story, isn't wrong. We all get to tell our stories in different ways. There's a reason why you can hear the I remember at the Sydney International Storytelling Conference last year, I heard the Good and Bad Sisters, like the 12 months, Diamonds and Toes, that version. I heard 3 different versions of that story. That was not the story I was expecting to hear 3 different times at the one conference. Each one was so different. I know that tale type back to front and upside down, but each one was so different, and each teller was equally engaging. I listened to all 3 quite happily and would not have said, well, I've already heard that story, I guess I can zone out now. I was engaged in all of them. 3 different tellers, 3 different countries of origin, 3 different ways of telling. It's still fundamentally the bones are the same, but that's the delight of stories. It's not actually the bones. The bones are vital. Knowing the bones is delightful, but it's the sinew and the muscle and how we breathe life into them that make them interesting, which is why we can tell Cinderella over and over and over again and still find delight in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what is it, what are the sinew and bones that you add to your stories? What is it that you are looking for in a story, and then how do you make it yours?
I'm always trying to find a story that I delight in. I don't. There's only very few times I've ever told a story which I didn't enjoy, and eventually I have enjoyed it for one or another reason. And I know that I'm not alone in this. I have read far more knowledgeable and well-respected storytellers who've always said the same thing. Fundamentally, you have to enjoy the stories you're going to tell. There is no point trying to tell Jack and the Beanstalk if you really cannot stand Jack and the Beanstalk. Or actually, maybe if you really can't stand it, you're going to maybe find a way to, I know, turn it on its head because you really can't stand it. You want to impart that on your audience. The things that I particularly love, though, are the musicality, the language. I love playing with language. I don't really think it's not like I have stories entirely in verse. Nothing wrong with that. There is some gorgeous historical and modern stories entirely in verse. But I just love playing with language, about playing with alliteration and rhyme and rhythm and how that all feels in your mouth and how that impacts on the audience. I love imagery. I just love the process of sharing stories. I mean, the sinew that I'm trying to add, I think can be summarized in my favorite fact in the entire world, which is the history of the word spell. It's the history in the word spell. It's one of the few words in modern English that we can trace back to Old English. So that's over 1,000 years old. And there's not that many words that have passed through. I mean, it's not like there's 10, but it's not actually a lot. You can't read Old English if you're a modern English reader. It's a totally different language. But spell has passed through. And in modern English, spell can be the order of letters in a word. It can be a short period of time, or it can be an enchantment. And spell in Old English, among other things, meant story. So to
Wow.
cast a spell is literally to tell a story.
Wow, that's an amazing little factoid. I love
It's
that.
extraordinary. And then when you can start looking at things, like if you read some of the sort of Scottish tales, when there's often lots of curses at the start of stories that be quite funny, and you can sort of start to realize that, and curse isn't the word they use, but that's how they would get defined in English, is that curses both, your face will always face the breeze and you have one foot out the door and one foot in the door and you're going to be uncomfortable until I return from the quest, is both an enchantment, like you have magically forced this, and also an up yours, like how dare you make me go on this silly quest. I'm like, it's curse. It has both powers in those stories, and so if you go look at the relationship between Scots and English, and you go, yes, casting a spell is telling a story, and I love the fact that I can stand there in front of an audience and tell a story, or one person at a table tell a story, and for a brief period of time, we are both hearing the same story, experiencing the same story, and yet experience totally different imagery and totally different worlds and totally original and unique stuff. And I think that's the most incredible thing that humanity has ever devised. That I can tell the same story 1,000 times, and each one is going to be new for me, and each one's going to be new for someone else, and we're all going to be able to experience that. I think it's the most purest form of wonder and joy we've ever created.
Oh, that is so beautiful. So what do you think? I mean, this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling.
Yeah.
So what do you think is at the heart? Why do we've created this mode of communication? Why do you think that we still do it? What is at the heart of storytelling?
What's at the heart of storytelling? I think there are 2 things at the heart of storytelling. The first is we are the only species on the planet, to our knowledge, that tell stories for our enjoyment. We know there are species that communicate, that explain, oh, this is the navigation, this is where we're going. We know bees dance to communicate, go over the pole. There's communication, that's the type of storytelling. Other species do that, but no other species has decided to just tell stories for the joy of it, or to pass down something that's a bit more nuanced and esoteric and actually going to take some time to devour rather than just explicit instructions. That, I think, is like it's something that we innately do as humans. It's something we innately do as humans, is tell stories. I think also is the heart of storytelling. I think of Pete Seeger. I love Pete Seeger, folk singer-songwriter, for a whole range of reasons, but including we have the same birthday, which is, I don't know, find Pete Seeger's birthday and you can work out how old I am. But Pete Seeger was known to say along the lines of, if songs could change the world would be changed. which is true, right? Like you can't just sing a song and suddenly you've fixed everything. But I do think songs and then for stories have the power to slowly chip away at people, at their souls, at the constructs and the systems that we have consciously and subconsciously put in place as a society locally and broadly, and slowly chip away at that so that we actually start being more honest with each other and slowly can start to change the world. You can tell a story, you might slowly change a person, and that person will slowly change the world. It's a long-term process. I don't think my one story is going to suddenly fix all queerphobia in the world, but maybe someone will start thinking just a little bit differently, and in 10 years they're going to think a little bit more differently and a little more differently and a little more differently, and then the world will be a better place eventually. The heart of the storytelling is how we are honest and communicate with each other and recognize that we are infinitely unique and infinitely different and equally important and connected.
Oh, wonderful. So, obviously you like to tell folk and fairy tale. Are they the main two types of stories that you tell?
Yeah, I don't actually tell any personal stories. I mean, I have, that's not true. Sitting around a kitchen table or with family and friends, and there are personal stories I tell, but I don't perform personal stories. I mean, I have a whole lot of poems that I have memorized because Edward Lear, for example, I absolutely love. So there's poems that I can recite, but I don't actually do that much in professional settings, mostly because I just haven't had the need to yet. I don't think there's actually anything wrong with that. I think there are some storytellers, I don't think it's a strongly held belief, but I think there are some storytellers like, oh, if you're reciting something, that's not the same thing. And I think it's not the same thing, but I think makes it lesser or better. They're just different, comparing apples to oranges. But I just haven't needed to yet. And I think in part because the bookings that I have and the performances I do in the festivals that I perform at, wanting to, I don't know, the sort of connecting with that sort of the ancient idea of storytelling. And I don't pretend I come from an ancient tradition at all. Almost all my stories have come from literary traditions that I have then interpreted. But there's something about that, I'm just going to talk and you are just going to listen and we're going to interact. And there's something, we don't do that a lot in modern society.
Listen,
So
we definitely don't. No.
No, and we don't have the opportunity to. I don't think there's even a lack of want from people, but if you want something and you can't articulate it and you can't find it, then you're not going to find it. But if you're given the opportunity, either as a teller or a listener, to do that, to go, actually, no, we're going to commit to this just for a moment. It's going to be a little weird for maybe 30 seconds, but then we're actually going to enjoy ourselves, or be challenged, or be whatever it is that the story is going to try and impart. I think there's real delight, and I've had enough people who've come up after performances and say how much they've enjoyed it. And it's clearly not just oh, you're great, Em, that's fantastic. And it's really not just great, oh, I need to be polite. That it's actually like, this is something unique that I think more of us should do. We should all be better storytellers. We should all be doing this. We don't all have to be professional storytellers. In fact, we probably shouldn't all be professional storytellers. Otherwise, the systems of economics that we have in place at the moment are just going to fall down flat. But we should all get better at telling stories, whether that's one-on-one around a kitchen table or in big settings, because, as I said earlier, it's how we become slowly more honest and true with ourselves and the audience, and how we can make better communications. I don't pretend I am as, having trained in music theatre and acting, I don't pretend that, I'm totally vulnerable when I'm on stage. Of course, there's a version of me on stage that's different to the version of me when I'm trying to fall asleep in bed, but there's still a level of vulnerability and connection that is innate in performance, and storytelling is more or less the purest form of theatre. Not necessarily the best, but the purest form of theatre. We're just going to connect, we're just going to be in this moment for this time. And that's something that we crave in a world that is trying us to be faster and faster and faster and have our minds in 1,000 different places. Having 5 minutes, 10 minutes to just go, no, here and now, let's just stop and experience this together is something that's vital. And I think as storytellers, we have a duty to try and remind the world, this is the thing that you're trying to crave, that we actually know there are enough people out there who are wanting this. They just haven't found it or heard or connected with enough to actually say, can you come over here and do it? And so we have a duty to sort of step just a little bit outside of our comfort zone to go, excuse us, let me storytell. Let's try this, and you'll be surprised by what can come of it.
Amazing. And so do you have a process that you go through when you got from picking a story all the way to performance?
It depends on the story. So I started properly storytelling in August 2020. And I basically decided then and there that at least until I ran out of puff, I was going to work on one story a month, because Newport Storytellers meets basically once a month. And so that gave me a deadline to do. And now that isn't consistent necessarily. Some months I work on multiple stories, some months I don't work on any stories. But it has actually, I was looking at, because it's easy to forget what stories you do or don't know when you're not telling every week or every month. I looked at my story index and I actually I have actually fulfilled that so far. There's just over 35 stories in my repertoire, and it's been about 35 months since I've committed to being a storyteller. So that's amazing that it's happened. Mostly ones that I delight in, and then I just read it and read it and read it, and then tell it and tell and tell it, and then check and go, oh, I changed that. I like the change, or I changed that. Oh, don't like that change, and check up on it. It's a little different when I set myself specific goals for specific stories, or I get a commission, which I've had a few commissions. Because then, if it's a commission, you've been told what story you're going to retell. In my case, at least, so it's not so much that I get to just find the story that sits in me. You've been told, can you do the Woman of the Well from John, the book, the Gospel of John? It's like, okay, now I have to find a way to tell this story. So there's more process in having to read it and find multiple translations. Go, I don't like this, or that bit. I mean, it's great theology, but gosh, that's dense and very dull to talk about. So how can I try and find some other way to do it? And eventually you sort of massage it and you find the angle, because like I said earlier, we're all bringing our own preconceptions and opinions to a story. And so if I get a commission, you're not just wanting the version that's, for instance, the gospel retellings I've been commissioned for. You're not just getting the one that's already written, because there's 1,001 translations, like you've heard that. That's not what they're actually wanting. What they're wanting is what I can bring to the story, what I can impart, what is my opinion. So that often has more work, and they're often more literary. Often end up having to write them down, because I am trying to find a particular avenue, and I often don't have the time to just let it become more organic in its language, because I'm a terror for commissions to doing it until the very last moment. I think the last commission I had, I was due to tell it at 20 past 10 on a Sunday, and I finished it at 1 past 10. It was objectively too late, but it's what I did. It went down well, but it was, I'm terror for that. But when it's not a commission like that, and therefore it's not quite as literary or written, I actually tend to not make very many notes. I might, actually a good example might be my retelling of La Befana, the Christmas Witch from Italy. I knew I wanted to do a Christmas story, and so I made a whole list of different Christmas stories, and which one most called to me, which one did I most want to tell right now, and La Befana was the one that I wanted to tell from my list. And so I just collected all the sort of summaries of her narrative and went, okay, I like that bit, I like that bit, I don't like that bit's a bit hard to get around, okay, so I went to that. I just sort of dot points of, okay, this is what's going to be like, and then I just sat on it and I just thought about it, and I just sort of talked it through. I'm like, oh, actually, it needs a refrain. Well, that kind of works as a refrain. And then I try it out with someone, like, okay, the refrain's not quite working. Okay, and it's like, I changed that. And so it's not like there's a 5 dot points and you too can do storytelling like Chandler. It's a very loose and organic process. But I'm fundamentally trying to explore what is at the heart of the story that I want to share with everyone, and how do I express that through rhythm and rhyme and repetition and the play of language, because those are the things that I most love to do. I mean, I do it in my spare time, even when I'm not trying to prepare stories for performance.
So have you noticed a theme with the stories that you tell? Is there something that comes up over and over again? For example, I like whimsical, magical, strong heroines who overcome things. So do you have a type of story that you like?
I started very focused on fairy tales. I was basically not interested in folk tales initially, because that's where I first fell in love with storytelling, is fairy tales. I still adore fairy tales and probably know more about fairy tales in a broad sense than I know about folk tales. But of course, there's a lot of overlap. So I started with just fairy tales, and then I can't remember why, but I had to do something, and so I decided to do the Headley Cow, which is from Northumbria, England. It's a folk tale. And if you're familiar with the Fisherman and his Wife, the German version from the Brothers Grimm, the Headley Cow is like an antithesis to that. Fisherman and his wife, everything gets richer and richer and grander, and everyone ends up more and more depressed. The opposite happens with the cow. The old woman in the story gets worse and worse gifts and gets inexplicably more and more joyous about how wonderful her gold turned to silver, turned into iron, turned into a stone. And I think it was about that point that I just sort of, not like I decided one day I was going to do something, but I just sort of that story was sort of the avenue through which, okay, well, I'm just going to find stories that interest me. So they generally do sort of feel in wonder tales. I'm not particularly interested, as a rule of thumb, in very realistic stories. But wonder tales, joke tales, wisdom tales, anything that's just, I don't know, has a message, not that it has to be didactic. I don't like being didactic at all. I hate when people start saying that fairy tales have morals, because I could speak about that for hours, but I won't. We have more important things to talk about. But I do want to impart my story. If I'm going to tell a story, I want to impart something, whether that be La Befana, I want to impart something about what people are like and how people can change the world, whether that's something like the runaway pancake, in which I just want to be silly. I just want to talk about a pancake that runs and blows raspberries and escapes people, because that's fun, and we should all delight in singing silly songs and blowing raspberries in each other's faces. Or whether it's something like Scrapefoot, the oldest version of God Lost Three Bears, which I just love as a story, but also gives an avenue that there are older versions of these stories, that this is not the one version. Stories endlessly change and shift, and you can even tell that without being didactic to 5-year-olds, because they know Goldilocks and Three Bears, and you can start telling Scrapewood and they start going, oh, it's a bit like, oh, but it's different, oh, but it's like, oh, but it's different. And then you have a discussion afterwards, and it's delightful that they can start piecing that together.
Do you have a story that you want to tell today?
Yes, I do. I was trying to think, what story do I tell? Do I tell a long story? Do I tell a short story? Long story and short story can be a very different thing. Like long story is 20 minutes, but I knew that would be too long. But I think I'll tell one of the stories that I think it was probably the second folk tale that I ever started to tell, because it's from Joseph Jacobs' More English Fairy Tales. Pretty sure it's More English Fairy Tales, might be English Fairy Tales. And I love Joseph Jacobs because he was born in Australia. And I decided, I read it, and I just love it because it innately plays with language. That's just part of the story. It's just a joyous thing, and it's one of the few stories I have which is a ghost story. I don't have many ghost stories, but this is one of them. It goes like this. In a teeny tiny town, there was a teeny tiny house. And in that teeny tiny house, there lived a teeny tiny woman who one teeny tiny day decided to go for a teeny tiny walk. So she put on her teeny tiny bonnet, straightened out her teeny tiny dress, picked up a teeny tiny basket, opened her teeny tiny door, and stepped out onto the teeny tiny street. The teeny tiny woman talked a teeny tiny way down the teeny tiny street until she came to a teeny tiny gate. She opened the teeny tiny gate with a teeny tiny creak. Now it's very important that you remember that the teeny tiny gate makes a teeny tiny creak. And I know you who are listening at home need to do it. I can hear you through the power of story. The teeny tiny woman walked through the teeny tiny gate and found herself in a teeny tiny graveyard. The teeny tiny woman took teeny tiny steps through the teeny tiny graveyard until she saw something. She saw a teeny tiny bone sitting upon a teeny tiny gravestone. And the teeny tiny woman said to her teeny tiny self, "This will make some teeny tiny soup for my teeny tiny supper." So she picked up the teeny tiny bone and placed it into a teeny tiny basket. Then the teeny tiny woman walked to the teeny tiny graveyard, closed the teeny tiny gate with a teeny tiny creak, you're right, and then she walked the teeny tiny way back down to her teeny tiny home. When the teeny tiny woman got to her teeny tiny home, she put the teeny tiny bone into a teeny tiny cupboard, took off her teeny tiny bonnet, put away her teeny tiny basket, and because she was feeling a teeny tiny bit tired, the teeny tiny woman hopped into bed. She pulled the teeny tiny covers right up to her teeny tiny neck, and she closed her teeny tiny eyes and went to sleep. But in the teeny tiny night, that teeny tiny woman heard a teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard. And the teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard said, "Give me back my bone." And this made the teeny tiny woman a teeny tiny bit scared, so she pulled the teeny tiny covers right up to her teeny tiny chin. And then she closed her teeny tiny eyes and went to sleep. But in the teeny tiny night, that teeny tiny woman heard a teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard. And the teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard said a teeny tiny little bit louder, "Give me back my bone." And this made the teeny tiny woman a teeny tiny bit scared, so she pulled the teeny tiny covers right up to her teeny tiny nose. And then she closed her teeny tiny eyes and went to sleep. But In the teeny tiny night, that teeny tiny woman heard a teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard, and the teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard said a teeny tiny little bit louder, "Give me back my bone." And this made the teeny tiny woman a teeny tiny bit scared. She pulled the teeny tiny covers right up to her teeny tiny eyebrows. Then she closed her teeny tiny eyes and went. But in the teeny tiny night, that teeny tiny woman heard a teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard, and the teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard said a teeny tiny little bit louder, "Give me back my bone." Oh, and this made the teeny tiny woman a teeny tiny bit more scared, so she pulled the teeny tiny covers right over her teeny tiny head. And then she closed her teeny tiny eyes and went to sleep. But, you ready? In the teeny tiny night, that teeny tiny woman heard a teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard, and the teeny tiny voice from the teeny tiny cupboard said a teeny tiny little bit louder, "Give me back my bone." And this made the teeny tiny woman a teeny tiny bit scared. But the teeny tiny woman found a teeny tiny bit of courage in her teeny tiny self. So she pulled down the teeny tiny covers and said in her teeny tiny loudest voice, "Just take it." And do you know what? It did. And the teeny tiny woman never saw that teeny tiny bone or heard that teeny tiny voice ever again. And that's the teeny tiny length of it.
That's so fabulous. And being able to not stumble over those words, it's just incredible. I really love that. How the delivery of that was so good.
Oh, thank you. It's one of my greatest flaws and greatest superpowers is I have inexplicably the ability to speak incredibly fast with incredible diction. No one knows exactly why. My accent is different from the rest of my family, and the note I most routinely get as both an actor as a storyteller is "slow down." But it's very good to show off in that story where I can talk very fast and know exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I would stumble all the way through that, but it's such a great little story that I wasn't seeing the end for. So I have to do some research, go back into Joseph Jacobs and have another look. So do
Absolutely.
you like telling to children in particular, or do you have a particular audience you like telling to?
I primarily tell to children and those young at heart. I think it comes from my experience as a magician that I don't really like telling to adults, which is slightly less true for storytelling as it is for magic, because storytelling there's a bit more leeway with adults in it going, okay, it's a fairy tale, I'm going to say yes and, which isn't always true as a magician. But I tell silly stories, I tell fairy tales, I'm telling stories of wonder. I'm not particularly in trying to have, quote, adult humor or adult connections. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not at all the sort of thing that I do. I'm silly and whimsical and have more than once been described as an elf. So I want to tell to people who, are able to say yes and that. And that's primarily, but not exclusively, children.
Oh, that's awesome. So do you have a special moment that you really enjoyed in storytelling?
Yes, I had a delightful moment last year at the Firelight Festival. The Firelight Festival is a big midwinter festival at Docklands in Melbourne that I have been one of the two storytellers at for the last 2 years, and hopefully will be at again. Not that I ever get to see the other storyteller. We're on the opposite sides of the dock, so we never actually see each other or talk to each other. We just get to tell the audience to go see each other. But you tell 3 different sets over the 3 different nights as a storyteller. And it's midwinter, so it's not great on your voice, but you have such a diverse audience and it's delightful. And I like to have 3 different sets, and so I prepared it all. And on the first night, I tell my 3 different sets, it's all going great. And the same kid and his parents came to all 3 sets. And I thought that was lovely. That's 3 or 3.5 hours at least that they've had to be there in the cold. So that was lovely. But then I got to the second night and they're back again. And they come to all 3 sets. And 3 sets don't change that much. The kid is hearing basically the same stories, but they're back and he's sitting there in the front row. It's like, oh, this is amazing. And they come back to the third night on the Sunday, and he comes to the first 2 sets. The third set, his parents finally convince him not to come along to because it's very late and it's a Sunday. But he's come to 8 of the 9 sets. Now, that's not the incredible bit. The incredible bit is on the Saturday night. The kids, I have since discovered, is a voracious reader of stories, had gone to his bookshelf and had selected a volume of Welsh folk and fairy tales. And he brought it to the Sunday, the last set, and he gifted it to me.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it basically brings me to every time, because I wasn't trying to do anything. I wasn't trying to have this effect on this kid, and yet it happened, right? I think it's just it's the power of a story. So yeah, it wasn't something that I planned. It wasn't something that he planned. I mean, there had to be level planning. I had to prepare my stories, and he had to very carefully pick what book he was going to share with me. But just through that moment, I told stories, and so I was given stories back. And so I have vowed, and I will continue to vow to tell one of the stories from that collection. The great trouble is there are so many good stories in that collection. I have yet to settle on the one that I will tell, or at least to start with. But yeah, that was. I think that is the standout moment in my relatively short career so far as a storyteller.
Well, I guess,
Is
I mean,
yeah,
you don't really know. When you're telling a story, you don't know the effect that that will have on the listener at all. You have no idea how they
no,
perceive the story or how they internalize it, anything like that. And so, what a beautiful gift to have that happen and for him to come so many times to see you. It's just so great.
yeah, no, it was incredibly moving, and still is incredibly moving.
Yeah. So, have you got any advice for people who are just starting out, who might be where you were a few years ago?
Do what I did is and just start. I mean, that sounds very obvious, but I mean, I was very lucky. I'm at the Newport Storytellers community storytelling group, so it's not there. I mean, professionals. There are professionals, myself included, who use that space as a rehearsal space, as a trial space, as just a space to share. But it's not there as a right. You must keep to exactly 8 minutes, and it must be on this theme, and where you can all have recitations. We have poets who are reading their poems, people who've written other people's poems, people who tell narrative songs, ballads, all sorts of stuff. And so it's a very welcoming environment. So if you want to try, find somewhere that is a community storytelling group or poetry group or somewhere that you can just start, because particularly if it's a community group, then they're not really going to care the level or quality or experience. It's just going to be a chance for you to start, because like most things, storytelling is it's like riding a bicycle. You have to do it again and again, then you get it. And once you've got it, it doesn't really go away, but you do actually just have to jump off the deep end and start. As terrifying as that is, and I speak from experience, it's terrifying. But once you get through, it's a delightful ocean of story that you get to swim in.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think if you're lucky enough to be in a community where you have space, and I think that's one of the things that I'm a bit frustrated with. I haven't got anywhere to practice, so makes it really hard to prepare. You know, apart from the online space, like in-person
Yes,
space, it's online
it
space. There's
is.
plenty of places to practice, but the in-person spaces here are not abundant. Yeah,
Yes, it is a challenge. Though, I mean, again, I'm very lucky. I'm surrounded by artists, being an independent theatre maker. But it's not true. I have tried practice stories when or days when I've just felt I needed to tell a story to my housemate. I've said, "Can I tell a story?" And they've basically zoned out. Like they're not really caring that much about what story I'm telling. But just having people around you who are willing to just, yeah, I'm going to listen to you. It's going to be odd, or maybe I don't really care what you're telling about, but just a chance to have listening ears.
yeah,
I think people would be surprised how readily there will be people around them. I
yeah.
speak in a very particular place of privilege, surrounded by artists, but I would think this would be true for lots of people. There's friends, brothers, siblings, cousins. Like I want to try this.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. It's no
The
weirder than I
cat.
just want to try bowling, or I just want to try doing a marathon. Like it's no weirder than that. So
Yeah.
jump off the deep end, find someone, and at least both of you will have a good memory and a good story if it fails miserably.
Awesome. And so what's the future for storytelling in you? Where do you see yourself?
I don't think it will stop. I have said multiple times, and until I feel differently, it will change. I adore being a theatre maker. I adore being a playwright, a director, a magician, a storyteller. But I can absolutely envisage a point in my life, a long way away, in which I will stop actively doing magic and stop actively directing and stop actively writing. I cannot imagine actively stopping storytelling. I love it too much. I mean, I said moments ago that some days I just need to tell the story. And so there's like, I'm sorry, housemate, you're just going to have to listen to me talk, because it's just something in me that requires to tell stories, whether it is to my housemate, a cushion, or myself in the shower, because I just delight with it. And it's what fundamentally my soul needs to do. I have never felt, once I jumped in the deep end, never felt as home as myself when I am storytelling. As an artist, you often have to film yourself to be able to watch yourself back and work out, particularly for a magician, is that hand in the right position or does that look right? I hate that with a vile passion. I cannot abide it unless it's storytelling. For some reason, if I'm watching back a video of me storytelling, that hatred and pain and anguish evaporates completely. And it's not sort of some narcissistic like, oh, aren't I great? It's just something about it being so very honest to who I am that the pain and the anxiety about watching myself back just can't get in, because it's, for lack of a term, it's what I'm born to do.
Oh, what a wonderful way to finish. You've been an absolute delight, Em. I've really enjoyed our chat today. I've got a lot from your experience, and it's good. There's a couple of people. I interviewed Nicola a few weeks ago, and she started in 2020 or about there as well. And it's nice having peers at the same stage of career in different places, and yeah.
Indeed. Thank you for letting me basically ramble about my favourite thing for far too long. But
Never too long.
there is something interesting about. I mean, that's what, 3 that I know. But I think there is actually quite. I wouldn't be surprised. There's lots of people who in 2020 started storytelling, and often, particularly hearing about stuff in the US and UK, about we're wanting someone to do a talk on the Renaissance of storytelling, on how it's a dying art, and storytelling has never really been a dying art, despite what people outside storytelling trying to say it. But I wouldn't be surprised if post 2020, I don't know, in the next 10 years, there is a more resurgence, particularly in places that haven't had a stronger performance storytelling culture like in Australia, that changes, because in 2020, particularly in Australia, we were all forced to reconsider what the world should be like. And what we craved was connection and community, and storytelling is a perfect vehicle for that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if slowly, stories change people, and people change society.
That sounds wonderful. Where can people find you, Em?
Oh, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at em.chandler.stories. That's my name, stories with a dot instead of spaces. Or you can find me on YouTube at mchandler. I have recordings of stories, and I try to do one every month. Haven't been successful so far, but I keep putting them up periodically because I like to share stories with the world.
You've got to have those goals. You've got to have the things to aim for, I think. That's
Absolutely,
and I did
absolutely.
too. I tried the once a month thing, and then I just got overwhelmed, so I stopped it, because I think I need like a 3 month, every 3 months, during all my time. Yeah. Well, thank you, Em, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.